Welcome to this episode of the Modern Day Missionaries podcast. Today I'm joined by my friend Dr. Janeen Davis, and we talk about some challenging things. We might ruffle some feathers, but we talk about secret sins that missionaries have and that they feel they need to hide due to shame, the risk of being pulled off the field. And so we go there and we go specific on them. We talk about pornography, erotica, same-sex attraction, gambling, some of the things that humans in general get mixed up in, as well as missionaries. What's a missionary to do about it? How do you know when you can safely confide that in someone when you need help? How do you get out of something like that? And then on the other side, for those of us who care for missionaries, what do we do when a missionary is brave enough to share their story with us? How do we react? How do we be, instead of being a culture of judgment, how do we be a culture of grace and restoration? So today's conversation is not black and white. It's gray. We wade into the messy and the difficult with a lot of grace and a lot of love. And we invite you today to join us in that space. So with that, let's dive into this conversation with Dr. Janeen Davis. Janeen, it is so good to have you back with us on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Stephanie.
We always have such a good time, and we're always talking about conflict and like spicy subjects. And I love it. I love it because we were just talking about this beforehand. You have this really fun side to you, and you're this peacemaker. And we talk about really controversial or difficult things. And that combination, I think, is powerful. And it's probably one of the reasons I just enjoy you so much and why I think you're called to do what you do, Janeen. That's just my
Thank
opinion.
you so much. Yeah, I really do just want to have fun. And I don't know if this is a useful reference. It's pretty old, but there used to be this show on TV called The Biggest Loser. And it was a bunch of fitness coaches helping people rapidly lose weight, maybe in an unhealthy way. I don't know. But there was one coach on there, Jillian Michaels, who like really screamed in everybody's face. And I was like, man, that's the one I would want, because I don't want anyone to put up with my baloney. And I want to be like the gentle Bob, like, you know, kind and patient. But I think what I need for myself is the Jillian, like hardcore, let's go, 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 you know, kind of person. So as is a little bit, I think, the theme of what we're going to talk about today. Mm-hmm. We're complex. Nobody's just one thing. And sometimes there's different versions of us. The version of me that wants the hard, don't put up with any excuses kind of coach for myself versus the type of gentle, patient person I want to be for others. And sometimes that self version can accidentally slip out in the wrong direction. So I have to watch that.
Well, and yeah, and like you said, you just alluded to that. We're talking about spicy stuff again today. And it's stuff that I think it's applicable. We don't be spicy for the sake of being spicy. We talk about challenging things because we want to help missionaries. So for all of you missionaries who are listening, we're going to go into some of these silent battles that you guys face, like confession, control, shame. I mean, some of those kinds of things. And the courage to be known, why it's hard to find some of those safe spaces, and how we can find them and how we can be those safe spaces for others. So Janeen, I just want to kick it off. Like, what are some of the struggles missionaries carry that don't fit into the normal Christian box? Like the kinds of things we feel like we're not even allowed to mention here, but we're going to mention them.
Okay. Well, then that's a fun way to start out. We'll definitely start with sex and sexuality. Like,
there we go.
It's going to be all the things. It's going to be all the things that you might have learned from a young age are not polite public topics for conversation. Then these are the things. And so the challenge is, have we ever learned to talk about these things? Maybe no. Yeah. Maybe all we've ever learned is don't ever talk about it. That's we carry so much into our mature adult Christian lives that are really just the childhood version of things that never got revised. And so there are areas of our lives that I think stay in immaturity. Of course, I think of that as it relates back to the conflict space. We have a very childlike framework for understanding forgiveness a lot of times, and thinking apologies are something that can be mandated by my mom, and so can also be mandated by HR. And we just like carry these ideas forward, and they're childish. They're not matured into a deep relationship that starts with the Lord and then flows out toward others. And so in these topics as well. We live with big pockets of our lives that are not allowed to be said, the things that must not be named, the unmentionable things. And I think a lot of it is because we've never learned how to talk about those things, and it feels very high risk. And we've seen it cost people when these things are exposed.
Oh, yeah. I think every missionary knows a story of somebody who was finally brave enough to bring something to the light and they got pulled from the field, or they didn't. And then it just like completely imploded and blew up their ministry. And I want to just say, too, like, we're not talking about this stuff to be gratuitous, like, so we can just be like, ooh, we're wild on this podcast. No, we're talking about this because it needs to be talked about. We're talking about because otherwise missionaries are being yanked from the field too soon, or they're imploding out of fear of speaking about them. Okay, so you mentioned one, sexuality. What are some of the topics in sexuality that we feel like we're not allowed to talk about as missionaries?
Well, anything that you can think of that would make you blush is on the list. Any words, any topics. These are the things, and we all know them. And the challenge is that we're going to need to move the line, particularly because it is undeniable that exposure to pornography is happening across the board at pre-adolescent stages, which has a long-term effect on people as they grow, as they move through puberty and adolescence and into adulthood, when they have been influenced by high-speed, rapid access to specifically things like pornography, or commonly for women, erotica.
And explain what erotica is if somebody might not know what that is.
Well, we might just differentiate that between a visual stimulation for pornography and more of a storyline and space for filling in the gap and inserting yourself into the main character of the story, as erotica kind of storylines, more storylines than visuals in terms of what's prompting that response.
Which could be like a romance novel, or it could be an erotic television show where there's a lot of romance and sex going on.
I didn't think I was going to talk about this, but here's here's a real example from the field. I don't know how many people understand this concept of maybe a guest house. There's like places around the world where if you're on the field, you have kind of access to guest housing where it's maybe run by an organization and it's a place that we can stay, or when we're coming somewhere from medical or whatever. Okay, so guest house concept. That is often stocked by the missionaries for the missionary kind of stuff. And I remember there was an annual meeting once where the women were separated from the men. And that generally has a tone of the men have stuff they're supposed to talk about, so the women should, I guess, just talk about something too. But we don't really have the agenda. The guys, you know what I'm like, has anyone been a part of that? Okay, so the women are chit-chatting, and I bring up, because I'm member care, so I'm leading this situation. And so we bring up the topic of shame and what it is to live with a secret shame and how that can isolate us, which is certainly what we're talking about, Stephanie. But in this topic, somehow what comes up is the content of the books in the guest houses. Because if you bring up romance novels, I started with erotica, and then what we have to understand is back in the day, when there was Christian bookstores, physical Christian bookstores, and I know that digitally now it's a different thing, but there are authors whose names come immediately to my mind that their whole career is Christian romance novels. And what became apparent in that day, it got a little out of hand and almost turned into like a book burning or something like that. But because people were like, if we're going to be honest about what women are primarily using in kind of a different form of pornography, which we didn't have the words to say erotica at that point, it's Christian romance novels, because they're stirring the heart and it's creating this wonderful fantasy of a romance. And the women that is creating the effect in women that was the very thing we're talking about. And they're like, we need to get these out of the guest houses. And again, I am actually not trying to put a template on anyone that says where I feel conviction and where I might struggle, the world needs to accommodate that, and let's go ahead and burn all the Karen
Right.
Kingsbury books or whatever. If that's something like that. You know what I mean? Like these something. There's a Christian theme in the romance novel that somehow made it. What are you thinking when you hear me say this, Stephanie?
Interesting. I'm totally intrigued because I like when I said romance novels initially, I was thinking of the ones with like big old sex scenes in them. But you're mentioning just romance novels in general, not even in general, Christian ones, and that's an interesting thought. I think that
Yes.
to me makes me really think about how temptation is so specific to each person, and that's
Yes.
where it is. It's not a black and white thing. So something
It's
that's like
not.
maybe innocent to somebody else can stir something in you. So okay, yeah, this is a good opportunity for all of us to go, okay, what actually is this some temptation for me? What actually is dragging me down? And how can I not impose that on somebody else, but be honest with myself? Huh.
So
Good
an
thought.
area of shame can be this sense that good Christians, should be immune to certain things. So the shame in this kind of a setting would be if apparently all the other Christians can read Christian romance novels and just like praise Jesus for how that rugged handsome man came to the Lord halfway through, or whatever the storyline is, you know, then what's wrong with me that there's arousal here and there's something, there's a additional
Hmm.
feeling laced with that I think is bad and wrong. I can't say that. I could never confess that because that's perverted. I mean, if we're really going to say the words where there's a lot of
Yeah.
shame, the things that we're not supposed to say at the dining table, especially for people that have really lived most of their lives in the Christian culture in some
Mhm.
way, there are things that they have never experienced a mature or righteous conversation about. They've never heard it
Yeah.
discussed. And so it feels like anything in the realm of talking about desire or arousal becomes very shameful, something that must be hidden because there's an instinct. I've never heard about this. This has never been discussed in any church setting. I've never seen any big books being recommended by everyone about this. So this must be something horribly wrong with me. I can never tell
Mm.
anyone about. Now
Okay,
I
Janine,
see
this is
this.
interesting
Yeah.
too
Yeah.
because like so I'm thinking as you're saying this, like the more of a good girl or good boy that you were per se, and I use that term, loosely,
Mhm.
going on the field, your shame threshold is lower. So if you haven't had maybe a lot of these experiences that other people haven't had, even things that might feel like, "What? Are you kidding me? How's that even a big deal
Uh-huh.
to you?" Can
Uh-huh.
can produce shame in you. My mom and I used to always like laugh. This is like kind of related, kind of not. Like we would always say, good girl's got to rebel somehow. So we wouldn't wear name tags at small group events. Like we'd be like we're not
That's
wearing name
awesome.
tags or like, sit in the back sometimes and we're like, "Oh my
Okay.
gosh, we're so bad." But like my point is when you have been good, and not all missionaries are that way. We all come from different backgrounds, but I think
Uh-huh.
sometimes you end up on the mission field and you've kind of lived a more straight-laced life, at least for some
Mhm.
of our missionaries. Yeah, you're gonna maybe experience shame very easily. And what's the product of that? You're not gonna want to talk about it, like you said. So maybe a good question for us is what are we not wanting to talk about? What is producing shame in us? What are we keeping quiet about? And we think if I told somebody, they would think it was so bad.
Mhm.
Hmm. This is good.
I think what you just said is really important, and I think this is really where I wanna go with this topic. We can be patient as we go there, but this is an important thing, what you just said. They're gonna think, "I'm so bad." We do have an innate culture of judgment in the church,
Hmm.
and I think that is really what fuels this. It's not not knowing how to talk about these things, it's understanding that if you say certain things, you will be judged,
Yeah.
and that I think that is the lack of familiarity and practice of confession partnered with the lack of familiarity and practice of non-judgment. They go
Hmm.
hand in hand in an outcome then that is that we do not have regular practices that we're seeing in church communities of real repentance and confessing our sins to one another. So when we sense that a sin is socially unmentionable, one of those things that we don't talk about over the dining table, like that we then assume, if I share this one, there will be consequences. And
Absolutely.
And it's judgment. Judgment is one of the core consequences. I mean, I think there are things that we are comfortable talking about over the dining table or around any small group. Well, I hope at least any small group, but struggles with common struggles that don't have as much of a stigma to them, like depression,
like
and anxiety.
overeating. Oh, I was going to say like an easy one, like overeating. People are like, oh my gosh, look at I ate too many brownies again. It's like, ah, ha, 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 ha. Like we laugh about that. Like that's funny.
Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. But like, okay, you just brought up anxiety and depression.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's becoming more acceptable now.
Yeah.
But that's kind of riding that line.
Yeah. But I think that at least people can admit, maybe more so with anxiety than depression, actually, but there seems to be an acceptance to that it's so undeniably prevalent everywhere, and especially in younger populations right now, that there's no point in having judgment about it because apparently everyone has anxiety, right? So I think that the prevalence removes some stigma. But when we're not aware that the prevalence of pornography use and feelings of compulsive and addictive patterns of pornography use, we're not aware that that's way more prevalent than anxiety. So we're not aware of the prevalence. So then we think it must just be me. There's something wrong with me. I'm gross. And plus where are these things experienced? We can experience anxiety in public settings. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I have a question for you. Do you think it's because we perceive anxiety as being something that kind of happens to us, or depression is something that happens to us because of our environments, whereas something like pornography or same-sex attraction or any of that is like a choice that we make? Is that the perception?
I think that could be a great insight. I think, and interestingly enough, it's not true. Like if I'm treating anxiety, or any of these kind of things, I say a phrase like this often, which is, your emotions are the product of the story you're telling yourself. So if you want to feel different, tell yourself a different story. Now, that is different than how we may initially intuitively experience things like anxiety or depression or anger or frustration or irritation. Is that external circumstance, that thing made me feel this or that, or the school schedule that my kids are trying to keep up with is making me anxious, right? Like, so we perceive it as something that is exogenous, like it originates outside of us and happens to us, rather than an endogenous experience that starts from within. And so a lot of times counseling is helping us feel empowered to change it by realizing there are things happening inside of me that I have the power to change, that can then help me to experience less of this, or not experience it like this anymore. But you're right. I think some of these things that seem more shameful and less mentionable maybe can be more easily explained as there's something wrong with me, which of course is a way of understanding what is shame, is I'm bad, as opposed to guilt. I did something bad. Shame is I am in my essence bad, unacceptable.
And it's weird how we classify them. It makes me think of, I remember reading the book Freakonomics years ago, and they were talking in Freakonomics about this study they'd done, and where they were comparing kids dying of, and please, nobody get mad at me for saying this. I am just saying a study. So I don't want to get email me, give me feedback, but don't get mad about this. The study simply showed kids dying from guns in homes and kids dying in pools, from falling into swimming pools in homes. And they were just looking at the facts of things. There was no political, the whole point of the book is they're not political. They're just looking at studies. And they were showing how kids are more likely to die of drowning in swimming pools in their homes. And they were saying that that's just hard sometimes for us to conceptualize, because dying of a gun, from a gunshot, is a violent death. Where a swimming pool, there's just something equally tragic, but it just feels, somehow it feels less like, it's not violent in our minds. And so there's just things that we do with that because of that. And same thing, like, okay, so let's think about emotions. You've talked about the emotion or the experience of anxiety or fear, we could say, is an emotion.
Yeah.
And then there is the emotion of anger. So currently, anxiety is acceptable to talk about. Anger
More
is less
so.
acceptable, because anger, again, I think it feels more violent. It creates a different image or picture or story in our head. And same thing, like you think about pornography or masturbation or same-sex attraction, it creates this picture or story in our minds that we don't want to see or think. Whereas overeating or other acceptable things like you talked about, we're like, hey, that's just something we all deal with. It doesn't feel dirty or violent. Does this make sense what I'm even saying here?
Absolutely. When you mention anger as an example of maybe a less acceptable emotion to admit to, that surprises me, or that challenges a way that I think about anger, because I frame that as something that I hear people eagerly and readily express, primarily through social media, where it seems like our go-to way of talking about any opposing viewpoints to our viewpoint on a topic, as with anger and condemnation. And actually, I think that directly feeds into the instincts that we have, that we cannot show up authentically in our local body of believers. We're here for mutual discipleship, and yet we cannot show up fully authentically in that setting. I think partly because of very common patterns that we have that show that it's not safe for you to say certain things. We're going to come down hard in advance with our judgment and condemnation about viewpoints, so that everyone will know they better not endorse that viewpoint, because we preemptively excluded it as a possibility for Christians.
Righteous anger is totally acceptable. We think
Oh,
if it's
that's
for
right. That's what we call it, righteous anger.
yeah, but don't talk to me about being furious with your kids or
Oh, yeah.
furious with. I mean, there's again, some things are okay, some things are not
Right.
okay, and I do think some of it has to do with consequences. Like the consequences of certain things are certainly bigger than others, but still,
Yep.
sin is sin, and struggles are struggles. So what do we do
Yep.
with all this? I'm a missionary listening to this, and I'm like, okay, like, yes, I totally resonate with what you're saying, but like the reality is, if I bring some of this stuff up, I do have to deal with the consequences of that. What do I do?
Okay. I think that's really important, talking about consequences. And maybe first, let's start by considering what our biblical role is in one another's lives. Is it
Okay.
to um, create fabricated consequences for each other to induce moral choices? I'm
Say
going to
that
propose
again.
no. What is the role that God calls us to play in one another's lives? Is it to induce, just create consequences that will assure at least me that you will operate as I believe you should? And if
So I
you don't,
punish you
there
to
will
make
be
myself
punishment.
feel so I punished you to make myself feel
I
better.
think it's a way to control each other. I think it's a way to control the narrative. I think it's a way to control lifestyle. And a lot of this we might say is biblical, but we have very little comfort allowing other people to land in different lifestyle places that do not directly connect with a specific command from God. But the challenge is we want it to, right? We want to live our lives out of conviction. And we often learn those convictions from our families of origin and our upbringing. And it's all twisted together with morality to the point that then we think all of my lifestyle convictions are biblical, which means if you land in a different place, that's wrong. You're wrong. And you're not being biblical, or you're not being a good Christian. And I kind of want the Christian world to align with my view of how Christians are supposed to act based on really just the home I grew up in or whatever. So I don't want you to be allowed to do that. I want to just say a neutral, stupid one. Like, I don't want people to be allowed to wear shorts to church. People should show respect. So if people do that, because I want to instill in my kids a sense of kind of more formal and humble reverence to the gathering of the body and to worship, I want to instill that in my family and in my kids. And I do not want someone else out there doing something that undermines this message that I'm trying to say, which is good Christians show respect and reverence to God in their words and even in their dress. So this person can't be wearing shorts because it's undermining this kind of simple absolutist way that I want my kids to understand the world. And so I'm going to make comments. I'm going to make comments maybe to other people, but certainly to my family. I can't believe the way that person's dressing. Here's what I think we do. This is all over the place. And this is something that I wanted to talk about with this idea. Where does this come from? Why do we have a problem of confession? I think it's because we've chosen to have a culture of judgment instead of a culture of confession. I don't think you can have both. I think that people will, whether we agree that they should or not, like, human nature shouldn't be this way. Okay, that's helpful. That's fun for you to say, but that's not helpful, and doesn't do anything. This is just how people are going to work, whether you like it or not, is if they believe there's going to be judgment and consequence for them being honest and transparent, they just won't be honest and transparent. So what you haven't done is you haven't actually won their heart. You've just shown you're not a safe place for them to be honest and transparent, or maybe the church is not, which means all of those things will never have a chance to be worked on, to be wrestled with the help of brothers and sisters. They're going to have to carry that alone because we've decided we would rather just be very hard-nosed and say, absolutely not, and this is not okay. And if somebody does this, there's going to be punishment and consequence and judgment, and there's going to be effects of this. What we're doing then, what we have to realize we're doing as a church or as a ministry team on the field, when we make hard statements that rule out someone's ability to struggle with something, we are not actually helping them not struggle with it. We are just telling them they have to struggle with that alone, and they have to be fake and act like they're not. That is effectively what we are doing as we have this culture of judgment. So, yeah. That was a lot,
Janeen,
but, yeah.
No, that was really good. So what things? So okay, missionaries are oftentimes overseas. They're on the field. They're in a different setting. So like the struggles just feel amplified sometimes, when they're in those settings. So what struggles should missionaries try to struggle through it with support on the field? And when do they need to be pulled or to go back? Because we've got, two listeners. Our primary listeners are missionaries. And then of course we've got our member care folk, and they're going, okay, but when is it time where they really do need to be off the field? Or I've talked to some missionaries recently who they're like, we don't know that we can fight this battle here where we're at. How do you make that distinction? Struggle here, struggle there.
I think we're dealing with a few different factors. One is this idea of qualification for leadership. So if we see missionaries as people that are in a leadership position, then we're going to have a certain standard of righteous living, a standard of submission to God's word and God's commands that we want them to be following in order to be a sent out ambassador of the gospel, essentially. Because effectively on the field, we are often innately in leadership positions in the eyes of locals, even if the ones that would send us out are a little mixed feelings about us being in leadership positions on the field that we wouldn't be allowed to hold back in the States. But I'm not going to go down that path right now. Either way, we are in leadership positions or seen as extra authoritative in cross-cultural environments a lot of times. So that goes into what are the qualifications for someone to be in a position of authority and influence and leadership?
Right.
And what, and then this is where it starts getting tricky. What type of sins are they allowed to struggle with? And are they not? I mean, are we holding them to the qualifications for elders or what? You know, and I think here's something that I think about, because I am the one that people say things to that they can't say to other people in their lives. You know, as a counselor, I hear a lot people telling me that this is the first time they've ever told anyone these things. Okay, I hear that all the time.
Same.
Which means these things are going on whether you want to let them go on or not. And that, I think that is just a fact that I want to keep coming back to, is we are not truly removing these struggles from the lives of missionaries by telling missionaries they're not allowed to have these struggles. Are you following me?
Yes.
We are naively thinking that if we say, well, missionaries on the field are not allowed to struggle with pornography. If you're struggling with pornography, then you need to go back home and deal with that. Or wherever the line is. If you cross the line while getting a massage in Southeast Asia, like, I'm not trying to, again, be inflammatory, but I'm just trying to think of the most common things.
Trying to be real. You're being real.
Then you're going to need to deal with that off the field. We're not going to, okay, fine. You can say that, but what is the result of that? Does that mean that anyone who crosses that line leaves the field? I'm going to tell you as a fact, no. It just means that when people cross that line, they hold it as a secret shame and they don't tell anyone and they stay on the field. Almost always. Unless they got caught at one point like that. But usually that's not the first time. They don't get caught the first time, which means what you're really doing is saying the worst sins that you can struggle with, you're not going to get any support for. We will support one another with mild sins, but major sins, we are effectively going to require you to keep those secret because we refuse to tolerate or admit that Christians struggle with this. And if you do, we're going to punish you. We're going to send you away. Well, okay. I think there's just a little bit of naivete happening. We want to believe that good Christians are okay struggling with these deeper character formation things, but we're generally on the path to holiness, and we don't want to consider the possibility that someone is more than one thing and is conflicting things at the same time. But I believe that is possible and not unusual. Someone can love Jesus and want to obey his word and make a horrible decision or be stuck in a compulsive behavioral pattern of pornography. It's such an easy example, pornography, but a new growing trend is gambling addiction and deep debt. Yeah. And they can love Jesus and also be caught up in a pattern of gambling. And we want to believe that a good, mature Christian doesn't have that struggle. They can have this struggle, but they don't have that struggle. And this is based on cultural comfort. This is what we're comfortable with and not what we're not comfortable with. This is not based on reality. And I think here's something, if we can get down to some core elements of this, here's some things that perpetuate this that are psychological truths, universal psychological tendencies, and very easy to observe. There's a human tendency that we all have toward oversimplification and dichotomous thinking, which means as human beings, the way I'm not trying to be secular here. I'm saying the way the organ of our brain is wired and works is for efficiency, rapid, quick understanding. And the way that our brains are able to understand information, all this information in the world, very quickly is through, we might use the word stereotypes or categorizing things, putting things into big, broad categories. And the way this becomes problematic in our relationships and within the church is we want to categorize people as good or bad. And so, I mean, is that enough to just say it like that? Holy or corrupt. And this is done on a large scale. This is done on a local scale. We want to oversimplify things and put people into maybe one or two boxes. And putting people into boxes and the way that we demonstrate to one another that we put people into boxes perpetuates this pattern. So here's what I mean by this. And I think this is maybe challenging and possibly convicting, but also important to say because it leads to what do we do about it? Okay. So I'll say it as like a challenge, maybe. We need to try to stop handling tidbits of information we have about one another or people in our small group or our church or church leaders or our denomination or on the national news as though that one piece of information gives me the authority to define someone by it. Say that's who they are. And that's what they're worth. Oh, whatever it is, a denominational leader, someone that has a large platform and is speaking about some Christian topic, like within Christian circles, and they say that. So when I demonstrate to people in my circle that I'm confidently willing to reduce that person who's an image bearer of the Creator God, called the same as me by his mercy to be his child. And I think that this piece of information, this theological stance, this political stance, this whatever, gives me the authority to reduce them down to my judgment about that and then talk confidently in my judgment of them, is teaching and reinforcing in our community that is what you can expect too. That we are going to reduce people and their worth and their value and their whole character, their complex character, down to the sum of one, maybe the worst thing they ever did, or the sum of one struggle that they're having. Oh, that guy or that lady that did that or said that or believes that. Yeah, I don't want you to be around them. Like their whole character is defined by that one thing. And I think that's important to realize that there is a deeper, broader consequence to these patterns of the way we talk, especially about people that maybe we don't know, or the pastor of the church or someone else at the church in our family car on the way home. That's more of an maybe American setting, maybe not, but the way that we give ourselves permission to speak with criticism and judgment and condemnation about another person as though that's what they're worth. They're just the sum of this one thing that I don't like, and I'm confident and able to speak like that. What we're doing is we're reinforcing every day an underlying message that is, if you step out of line, I'll do the same to you.
Wow. What an important place for us all to just begin, like to just take an evaluation of our words. What is it that I'm saying about people? And especially people who have fallen in some way, shape or form, because we all have sinned in so many different ways every single day. And so what are the ways that we're talking about others? Because you're right. That's what we're teaching our kids. That's what we're teaching our teammates when we speak that way. And we're reinforcing that message in ourselves. I was thinking as you were talking, Janeen, about soldiers that get sent off to war and how when they come back, so often they have a physical or an emotional injury of some sort. And we're at a place now in society where we're not shocked by that. If a soldier comes home and has PTSD, like there is some grace that's extended there because we're so thankful they put their life on the line. And when I think about that in terms of missionaries, it almost feels like, could we do the very same thing? Because we laud these missionaries and put them up on these pedestals. They're these amazing people who've gone out to fight the war, to spread the gospel, to do the thing. And the second they fall, all of a sudden we're shocked. Like we're just shocked. And I'm like, why are we shocked? I mean, you and I have lived as missionaries, so we're not shocked. But other people are. They're shocked that they've fallen when they've actually gone to some type of a battle. So the likelihood of them experiencing that kind of stuff
Yeah.
actually, I think, goes up. That's not an excuse for any type of sin for anyone. But golly, it helps us extend a lot more grace if we can realize they put their life on the line for the gospel. Could I be a little bit nicer and sweeter and more grace filled as I help them through whatever it is that they're going through? Because I'm not rescuing sex traffickers on the other side of the world. I'm
Yeah.
not living in a community where this particular temptation is rampant. I'm not feeling that type of particular stress on my family and marriage. If I was, I mean, if we just think like, what if that were me? If you're not a missionary listening to that, what if that were me? How would I react? And if you're one of the missionaries who didn't have that temptation and you came back, still it's not going, well, I didn't, so it doesn't mean that they should. Well, maybe you served at a different time, or God gave you a different kind of grace, or you have a different type of personality. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, that's good. It's like we need to assume that soldiers and and people in the spiritual battle are going to come
Yes.
home wounded, and the only question is, in what ways, rather than when they fall and they struggle in certain ways, if it comes out, to say something like, "I thought I knew you," is the most naive and unhelpful thing to say, because
Oh,
it means that one piece of information about them, or one failing in their life, redefines everything else about them. And thank God for the gospel of grace that says the opposite.
yeah.
That I'm not defined or limited to the worst thing I ever did, but rather I have hope and I'm in progress. I'm not just a static sin, and that defines me and that's who I am now. I'm not
Right.
static. I'm in progress. And so I'm going to struggle with different things at different times, some acceptable, some unmentionable maybe. But if we can have just a better understanding of the course of life, rather than judgment about someone being in a valley, expect it and not think that it undermines everything else that we knew about them or entrusted them
Yeah.
to. I think one thing that can motivate us is this idea that when you name something, it loses its power over you.
Yes.
So the gift of confession, which is a command that God has given us, like these are his gifts to us for our good, is when we do find community, and maybe we do little tests along the way to see how do people respond with this and that, and is this mutual? Are they taking risk too? Are we growing in vulnerability to the point that we've learned they're here for me as my brother and sister and fellow traveler in this journey and race that we're trying to win. We're not trying to find penalties on each other along the way. We are running to win, and we want each other to win. So as we can grow in trust, we can earn that in one another by being mutual. And a really important thing to understand is I don't get to do that if I'm not allowed to name the thing. When it goes unnamed, it still has power over me. But to
Yes.
name something, to say it out loud, immediately has this effect on us that I'm not as bound by it anymore. So I think that's just an important thing to think about. Yeah.
Yeah. We can't keep this stuff inside. So for any missionaries who are listening who are dealing with any of the things we mentioned or anything else, like getting it out, saying it, and maybe that is with a trusted friend. Maybe maybe you have a space in your missions organization where it is safe to say that and you don't have that fear of them pulling you. That's amazing. Maybe you do. Well, there's organizations like Vallejo that provides
Yeah.
counseling where they get missionaries, or we even at Modern Day, we have two counselors who provide free counseling to missionaries, and they're not connected to any organization. So
Wow.
there are spaces to have these conversations, but it's gotta come out. And I think too, we have to just get like tired enough of our sin that we are willing to take the risk to say that. And I know that that's
Yeah.
easier said than done, but like, what's the option to live with this and let it slowly eat me away from the inside, or
Mm-hmm.
take the risk to find a space to be able to share that? Um, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we want it from both sides. We want to encourage people to take the risk because your life is at stake. You can just sit here and and live holding the secret shame and struggling with things indefinitely, or you can name it. And so we want to encourage people to recognize the value of confessing, even if it's scary.
Yeah.
But we also want to encourage the same people and everybody else to like lower the risk. Don't make it such a costly thing. And that comes with deciding that, you know what, there may be natural consequences to this sin, but it's not going to come from me. So I'm not going to hold this oversimplified version of them. I'm not going to define them by this for the rest of our relationship. I'm going to recognize, yeah, this is one thing about them, and this struggle is real, but everything else I knew about them is also still real. And they chose to trust me. So my response, rather than, I can't believe that, and I'm so disappointed, and how do you justify that biblically? No, my response is, whoa, thank you for sharing that with me.
Yeah.
Thank you for trusting me with that. I'm going to sit in that space with you. I'm not your jailer and your prosecutor and your judge, and now I'm going to decide what the consequences need to be. Honestly, I think it would be okay to let the Holy Spirit work in them, and let our role just be to sit with them in that space and walk alongside of them, and maybe ask questions like, what is the right environment for you to overcome this, and how can I support you in that?
Wow, that's
Do
a great
you think
question.
that you need to, consider surrendering even your call, maybe, and consecrating your calling to ministry right now? Consecrate as in to submit to the rule and authority of God, and just place it under his ruling. Like, will you surrender even your calling to the Lord for his holiness and for the sake of your sanctification and transformation? Like,
Yes.
what do you need to do if holiness is the goal, not job stability, not respect and honor from people that may not respect you anymore, but like, if holiness is the goal, what do you need to do? And how do I help you be brave and obedient to walk toward that, rather than, I'm sorry, we're going to need to remove you from ministry. Like,
yeah. Because the goal is restoration.
If the goal is restoration, it's God's glory. And I'm not denying that there are some struggles that there's just not the support available to work through that on the field. But more and more in our virtual world, maybe there is. I would love for us to slow down from being fast on consequences, and slow down and allow that person to have more of a role in those kind of decisions, where we're sitting here and we're trying to fix our eyes on God and his glory and his holiness, and let that be the thing that influences any decisions, rather than, here's our decision.
And Janeen, you're calling us into a messy space.
Oh, it's so messy.
It is. And organizations like Black and White and rules. And if this happens and this happens and this happens, and I understand, because there's legal implications that people get concerned about, or there's like, well, if this happened and I didn't say something about it, then what? And that is a reality of the world we live in too. And so what I appreciate about this conversation is you are not giving people an exact thing to do. I think what you're trying to do is challenge people to think in a different way. You're trying to challenge missionaries to take that risk and find those spaces, and saying you're not alone in this. And then with people on the care side, challenging them to not just default to what's written in the booklet. Maybe have, even as an organization, have some new conversations like, how could we handle this differently? How could we handle this on more of a case-by-case basis, rather than a knee-jerk, this is what we do? Because like, what is more beautiful than a restored Christian, than a Christian who has been through something horrible, and God's brought them through on the other side, and they have a story to tell, whether that was a crisis that happened or a sin that they walked through.
Yeah.
When God redeems and restores you, like, he just amplifies your story that much more. Now, we don't seek out sin stories so that we can have a great story on the other side, but God in his grace wants to use those. And how sad if we're losing out on all of those stories and all of those lives. And like you said, people whose lives and stories are so much bigger than the mistake that they made. So
Yeah.
thank you for bringing this in and going there with
Yeah.
me. And I'm sure we've ruffled a lot of feathers today. And I know we're both okay with it. I'm a harmony and peace gal, so there's a little piece of me that's like,
Yeah.
oh, I hope you still like us and know our heart. And also, if you don't, that's okay too. Because if this stirs conversation, good. Let's have the conversations because we want missionaries
Yes.
to thrive on the field. So we're looking for every way we can to help make that possible. So I love what you do, Janeen. I love what you have to say and the way that you say it.
It's always fun, isn't it?
It
If we're
always
going to give
is.
somebody one thing that they could do, whether they're struggling with an unmentionable or just a normal or anything, how do we go deeper and how do we start to invite deeper layers in our relationships with brothers and sisters is maybe start talking about instead of, what are you hearing about in the word or how can I pray for you? That's going to typically prompt pretty sanitized answers. But what if we say, hey, if you think about what you're looking at on your phone and social media and entertainment and who you're talking to anything about these days, any part of your life, if you're looking at all the parts of your life right now, what part of your life do you feel is least consecrated to the Lord right now? And let's have that conversation. And let's lead with vulnerability. I think somebody has to go first. No matter which side you're on with this, somebody has to go first. So let's go first and let's just benefit so much more from this wonderful sibling relationship that God has invited us to have with one another. That is my exhortation for the day.
Amen. What a great note to end on, Janeen.
Yeah.
Thank you again for coming in, challenging the way that we think as you always do. And in a really Holy Spirit inspired way, I believe, and giving us new things to do, to think, and to pray into. I appreciate you.
Yeah. Thank you. You too. It's always a pleasure.
Hey, missionaries, I've got a question for you. How are your finances on the field? Also, are you feeling supported by your senders? At Modern Day Missions, we make it simple for missionaries to receive donations and for their donors to give. As the largest independent missions organization in the U.S., we process donations from more than 1,100 missionaries to and from countries all over the world, helping them get on the field and freeing them to focus on what they're called to do. And we also create and connect missionaries to resources that help them flourish on the field, like this weekly podcast, fundraising coaching, and our resource-packed newsletter. So connect with us at modernday.org to explore our free resources and discover how we can serve you. We're so glad you joined us today.